unfortunately, we are resigned to being in front of the screens. So please mute yourself and switch off your video camera at all times, unless requested otherwise. And also, please introduce yourself before you ask your question during the Q&A. Again, only so that we know who you are. And all chat messages are meant for everybody, and sharing is caring. So don't hesitate to post your messages for everyone to read. And I'm sure Prof. Perry will also appreciate different perspectives and inputs to the discourse today. For those who are using mobile phones, please note that some of the Zoom functions may not be available to you. So we encourage you to switch to a desktop or laptop, but if you don't, we're just so glad that you're still able to join us, but there might be some limitations during the interactive sessions. So you are certainly not here this morning to listen to anymore what I have to say, but because we have this prominent speaker who will be running today's workshop. Our speaker, Professor Perry Hobson, has a terrific international profile and experience, having lived and worked in the UK, the US, Hong Kong, Australia, and of course, Malaysia. While the main focus of his academic background has been in hospitality and tourism marketing, there has been a constant underlying theme of his career that is internationalization. Passionately committed to teaching and research, Prof. Perry Hobson was previously the director and CEO of the International Center of Excellence in Hospitality and Tourism Education in 2006, transforming it from an Australian federal government initiative into a world-class quality assurance and accreditation body with members in more than 14 countries. He has also been active in many professional associations holding various leadership positions and continue to do so. And the list is so long that we could spend the next 2 hours talking about all his achievements. But he has also played the role of a PVC for global engagement in many institutions, including at Sunway University, where he worked hard in developing strategic plans to increase international partner networks and international student engagement. So today's topic on international collaborations is really hitting his sweet spot. He's currently the Professor of Tourism and Special Advisor on Tourism Education at Sunway University. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Perry Hobson. And I would like to invite him now to lead us through this interactive session. So zoom away, Perry. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome, Prof. Avi, and it's great to be here this morning and to be joined by so many people. And particularly welcome to those of you who are joining us outside of Malaysia. I see on my list here we've got colleagues joining us from the Philippines, so muhai and welcome to you. And from around Malaysia as well, from both east and west, so it's great to have you joining us today. We've got quite a range of delegates, and I'm actually going to, because we're a reasonably small group, we have about 300 enrolled, I believe, over the 2 days, but there's only about 20 of us here, which is a fairly manageable group actually for a workshop like this. And so I'm hoping to find out as much about you as well, because I think many of us are working in this area. We don't actually have a lot of connectivity with people who are facing very similar issues, not only within Malaysia, but around the region and, dare I say, globally. These are not issues just for ourselves to be dealing with. So I see we've got everyone from Deputy Vice Chancellors to PhD students, to registrars, to academics. So it's really quite a diverse group that we've got here today. And I know that there may be a number of things that you're hoping to get out of the session. So I'm just going to start with a few thoughts to start with. Let me just get that up. Hopefully everyone can see this all right. Please do use the chat function if you've got any comments. We've also so that I can see along the way. That would be great. So when we, as we look, oh dear, it's just managing not to work here. There we go. So I'll just back up here for one moment. So as mentioned, this is track D, which is looking at the international reference. There are 2 workshops today, one this morning and then one this afternoon. Now, as you've heard, my background is fairly eclectic and international. So I'll be honest, I regard myself very much as the accidental professor in that respect. I had no intention of joining academia. Both my parents were educators in the UK. And when I was about 17, I asked my dad what I should do in life. And he said, son, whatever you do, don't teach, get into something else. But it was clearly in the genes. My mother was a teacher too. And so I ended up in education when I moved to the US and took on a role as a research assistant. And I've been in academia for a long time now. And part of that started really when I was an undergraduate student as an exchange student back in 1984. So a very long time ago, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So I had the privilege of working with a number of different institutions, as you've heard. And just in way of introduction, I'm just going to touch on a few of those. So for example, in Europe, I've been advising the I'm on the International Council of Ostrava University in the Czech Republic. So just to put this into context, the Czech Republic, although it's right in the center of Europe, has a very large number of international students in theory. On paper, half of them come from Slovakia because it used to be one country. So when you look at their internationalization, it was all about what had been the other half of their country. Now the universities are seeing how they go international and what they need to do to build networks. Being part of the European Union Bologna, that opened up a series of doors, but they had very little connection into Asia. So what they've done is pull together a range of people from around the world to advise them on their internationalization strategy. How should they go about doing it? And not just to ask people within their institution what they should do, but obviously to reach out to people like myself to focus on that. Now, more closely, when we look at collaboration, which is the focus of today's workshop, very much I've been involved with this issue of do we collaborate or do we compete? And that's going to be my point of departure for today, because a lot of institutions really see the focus more on competing than cooperating. Now, the world has changed in many different ways, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so, again, this brings this question of what strategy, and if we are going to take a collaborative strategy, how do we implement it? How do we make sure that it's the right strategy, that it's integrated, and that we can obviously be assured that what is happening within that. Now, obviously, talking about things changing, normally would have met today, I'm sure, face to face. But obviously, we've gone online, and so have many other things gone online. And so has a lot of international collaboration gone online. Obviously, many students could not move around the world. My own daughter was supposed to be moving from Australia to Canada on exchange at this point in time, but obviously she can't go. She can't even leave Australia at the moment. So, but she has just completed a virtual exchange to the University of Indonesia. So again, this hasn't stopped her. The university's been responsive in finding new ways to internationally collaborate. And I suspect as we come out of this pandemic, while there's going to be a lot of people who want to go and start moving around, there's also going to be a lot of opportunity for different forms because we have got so used to using technology to do new things. And again, I think this is really worth us thinking about how we can embed those sorts of activities into our internationalization. Now, over the years, I've been very involved with transnational education, which again is another important part, and obviously Malaysia. And I see today we have a number of people from the branch campuses. So welcome to those who are joining us from Swinburne University over in Sarawak, and to Newcastle University, and to Monash. After all, these have been examples, and internationally Malaysia is looked at as having really grabbed T&E with both hands in terms of both how individual institutions such as Sunway, but obviously other institutions in Malaysia as well have embraced T&E partnerships. Also, we've got the branch campuses and how these have grown. And so I've been quite involved with that, combining the points I just made about virtual exchange with transnational education. So this was a recent article that appeared in what's called the Pie News just last week, where I worked with some people in the UK, University of Arizona, on seeing where we think transnational education is going in the future. And even organisations like the British Council have been very focused on this, about how we develop sustainable paths for these global collaborations. Now, obviously, as collaborations have changed and matured, there is a question about their longevity. And how do we make sure that there is what we call resilience? And that resilience in these partnerships is actually the topic of next week, where I'm speaking as part of the Pi News Live session, which is running in conjunction with the API conference. API for this part of the world is the Asia Pacific Association for International Education. There's EAIE, which is the Europeans in that part of the world, and NAFTA in North America, etc. And next week, the conference is running again online for the first time. And as part of that, we're looking at this question about how we build resilient partnerships. So there are some interesting focuses and things that I get involved in, and I will bring those into where we're at today. So today, back to today and where we're going. Today, my goal here is to share some insights on the global standards for international collaboration. This is what was put in the brochure that you received. And what we want to look here at is how we can establish quality and meaningful international partnerships. Now, many universities are looking at how they can develop international partnerships, how they can better reflect on the partnerships they've got. And obviously, as I indicated in my introduction there, things are changing. And so a lot of the technology that we probably would not have used even 12 months ago is very much part of our everyday life now. So things have changed really quite substantially. So as we look forward to that, you know, I would like now that I've given a little bit of introduction there, because I've got about 20 people I can see. And I'm just going to quickly go around and I'm going to ask you, I know Abby was saying, please keep your cameras off, but it's really great for me to be able to see, and I think for us to share, and I think that's important, who we've got here. So I'm just going to ask a few of you, if you might, I put a few questions up there, which are, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit, and tell us about the role you have at your institution and the sort of international collaborations you currently have or your institution's been exploring, and your motivation for attending this particular session. Because I'm very interested, because we've got such diversity when I looked at that. Now, I'm just going to go sort of by screen here. So we'll just see who pops up, who comes on my list here. So I was wondering, Jefferson, do I have you here? Jefferson from Swinburne? Have we got Jefferson? No, we don't have Jefferson. Oh, that's a shame. Professor Dr. Razia Mohammed Janor from UIT Mara. Oh, Jefferson, you can't unmute yourself. Oh, that's a bit of a problem. Okay, I don't know if that's if we can unmute. Let me just see if I can find a way to unmute you. I think that may be in my control here. I think they may have given me the panels to do that. So let me see if I can just work out. Unfortunately, I can see Jefferson.
Yep. Hi.
Ah, Jefferson.
Yep. Sorry, I think the host just unmuted me.
Ah, okay, that was what happened. Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning and welcome. So you're based at Swinburne University?
Yes, I am.
And what's your role there?
I'm with the Policy Planning and Quality Unit. So
okay.
We do rankings and ratings like SETARA, and also the courses accreditation. So we try to match TechStar and MQA.
Fantastic. Now, I've had the privilege of visiting your campus some time ago, as I've got one of our former PhD students, Sam, who is originally from Nigeria, working over there. Okay. And so it's been great to come over there. Now, just tell me a little bit about your international partnerships. Obviously, you're a branch campus, so you've got a very clear link with Swinburne in Australia.
Yes.
And what others? Go on.
Yep. So I just mentioned just now, so we had to constantly try to work closely and match whatever TechStar requires and whatever the MQA, the local regulators, needs us to do. Yeah. So very much your challenge is being able to connect with local regulation with Australian regulations. That's correct.
Right. And they don't always match up, is what I'm guessing is happening here.
Yes, there are always gaps, but we try our best.
Okay, all right, that's great. All right. And particularly for you, what motivated you for this particular session? What's your particular burning sort of issue or challenge that you feel you're facing? Is it those gaps or other issues?
Yeah, it's also those gaps and on to see from a bird's eye view, because I think right now what I have is very much Australia and Malaysia. So just to see what, what you have to bring to us, the outside as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you so much.
Now, the second on my list, I've got Professor Dr. Razia Mohammed Janor from, if I've said that right, apologies if I haven't, University of Technology, Mara. I don't know if we can switch you on. We've got you here. I'm just searching for you. It's very difficult with so many blank little faces here. It's quite hard to work on that. Perhaps not. From Newcastle University, Farah Farisa Mustafa, you've joined us today? From Newcastle, I'm interested in, I'm just trying to see, I can see, it looks like you're here. We can try and unmute you.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, Pra?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
So great, thank you. Now, so just tell me a little bit about the area that you work in down there. You're in the quality assurance area, is that right?
Yeah, I'm also the quality assurance and accreditation executive for Newcastle NewMed. So my role is actually like almost the same with Jefferson.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm working on all the recognition, like locally and outside of the country as well. So that includes so Malaysia obviously and the UK, and then with the Sri Lanka, Thailand, and many more.
Okay, so this is obviously this is where we're coming out from medical recognition, for recognition to practice as a doctor. Is that the main focus of your challenge? Hello? We lose you there?
Hello. Okay, I'm back.
Hello? Oh, you're back.
All right.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. All right.
That's
so,
all right.
Yeah.
So this is the challenge of getting recognition for to practice medical. Is that the particular issue that?
Yeah.
Because I know that's a particular professional issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because some of the country they have like sort of special procedures, especially for the medical education. So we sort of like finding strategies so how we can manage everyone's, but maintaining the quality. Yeah.
Right. Okay then. So again, it's this issue of having regulation in two different jurisdictions which don't naturally mix up or match up, if I can put it that way. All right. Okay. And today, what's your particular? Is there any particular thing you're looking to? Your motivation for attending this particular session? Oh, I think we've lost you again. No, the technology is not working with us today.
All right. Okay, I'm here again.
Okay.
All right. So my aim is actually to find, maybe if I can get any global standards to see if there is any, to give some ideas so how we can get the global standards, what people have been doing with all those international recognitions. So maybe we could pick some of the strategies here and there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Well, let's see how we'll go on there, because there's such a breadth of things we've got here. Now, I'm going to just thank you for that, to move to Xie Pen from Monash University. So literally across the road here, it's somewhere, though I'm not right there. Xie, good morning.
Hi. Yes.
Hello.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Xiaoyan from Monash University. So actually, I'm very new in this quality and assurance. So I'm working for quality and assurance unit in Monash University, Malaysia. So also we are working together with Monash University, Australia in this quality and governance, and also for some process of improvement. In this section.
Great. So again, you've got the joys of dealing with the MQA, with TEXA, and with various medical bodies as well, I take it.
Yes, we are working for cost review and accreditation. Yeah, same as Jefferson, we are working for Satara and also working for some self-accrediting audit with MQA.
Okay. All right. And any particular issues that you really feel that you're facing at the moment that come up, or solutions that you'd love to seek to be working on given the challenges you're facing?
I'm still exploring of what I can learn in this quality assurance. So what I'm looking for is how I can adapt the global reference into my current working environment.
Right. Okay then. Well, thank you very much for that. I really do appreciate that. And let's see how we'll go, because as you said, this is a challenging sort of area that we've got here. All right, just moving quickly along. I don't know if we've got another colleague here from Swinburne University of Technology. Kietzing, are you here? I'm just looking. Because sometimes I can't see who's exactly on the screen because there's different bits of different people's names. Are you here? Heng, is it? I've just got Heng from Swinburne. No, that doesn't seem to be happening. I don't know, Jefferson, if your colleague is here. Doesn't look like it. Okay then. Janice Garcia from the University of the Philippines. I can't see if I've got you here. In which case, I might turn to Anna Patricia, who is also from the University of the Philippines. I'm going to try and get you to unmute. Good morning, Anna Patricia.
Good morning. Hi, good morning, Prof. Perry.
Good.
Pat. I'm Pat. You can call me Pat. I'm from the
Okay.
College of Music. I'm their Academic and Administrative Assessment and Development Officer. It's also for QA. Quality assurance, and I'm included in the cluster A, which is the arts and humanities cluster in the university.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for joining us. I can hear the honking of the horns in the back of Manila, so it sounds like you've got traffic going on there. Tell me a little bit about your international collaborations and the challenges you're facing, because obviously we've heard a bit from the branch campuses here in Malaysia. The University of the Philippines, very big university. I've had the privilege of being in the Philippines many times, but largely to some of the other universities like University of Santo Tomas, Lyceum, Far Eastern, etc. So you're a very big public university, as I recall. So what are some of the challenges you're finding with international collaboration?
For our college, most of our students usually go abroad, and we usually invite artists to have master classes. But for the current situation, we are finding ways on how to do that, because one important aspect of learning in music is having synchronous sessions together, like playing together, listening together. So in this current setup, yeah, we want to find out how the international national bodies do it. That is beneficial, not just for compliance sake. Right.
So a lot of your students would historically go on exchange, is that right? Would actually be mobile in terms of their travel?
Yeah. Before it used to be really like that, but now
right.
we just have to do what we do.
That's right. COVID's brought us a new world about how to do these things. All right. So that's a very big challenge that you're facing there, about how to give the students the experience and to build up their skills and techniques in that area. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much. It's welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. And I might turn to your colleague who's also, I can see here, also from the University of the Philippines, Joel.
Hi everyone, mabuhay from the Philippines.
Oh, hi, welcome. So
I'm,
you're also at the University of the Philippines in a different area, an academic, I see.
okay. I am actually belonging to the College of Education at the University of the Philippines Diliman campus, and I'm part of the quality assurance team. We call it in the UP as Academic Advancement and Development Office.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a little bit about the collaborations or the challenges you've got at the moment.
Wow. Actually, the College of Education used to have extensive linkages with the universities in Thailand, like Chulalongkorn. And until now, we're still having such partnership. And also University of Melbourne. And
Okay.
yeah, so just like this.
So your collaboration's quite a different set of challenges that I can see that UP is facing over some of the QA issues that our branch campuses here are facing, where this is much more in a regulatory environment,
Yes,
where you had your students been on exchange and so forth. All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Joel. Thank you. I'm just going now to move along and just see who else. I've just heard from Heng that he can't get his microphone working. These are the new challenges, of course, that we're dealing with that. Now, I see we've got a couple of colleagues here from Intech Education College. So I'm just going to see if I can find you, if I can, I've got Nora Fahana, Che Othman. I just wonder if I could unmute you. Can you?
Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Perry, and good morning, everyone. I'm Nur Farhana from Intech Education College in Malaysia. Currently, I just actually just being appointed as the part of the quality academic team in my college. So I'm in charge in monitoring the running program in Intech. All right. Yeah. And in Intech, we have like a lot of programs that we are offering, such as A-level and also the American American credit transfer program. So I will also would like to know or at least get the idea if we want to collaborate the university, especially from the outside Malaysia. So how what is the kind of procedure or anything that related how we are going to collaborate? At the same time, we would like to maintain our quality of the program.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, those are challenging issues. So yes, again, very different sets of issues where you've got students going on pathways like an ABP transfer program where students will do part of the program in Malaysia and then transfer over and complete their programs somewhere else, and trying to get those matching issues right. So thank you for that. Thank you. I believe your colleague is here as well. Kasalai, can I? If I can, you're very small to read. Let's see if I can. Kausalawa. Oh, I can't read. Oh dear, it's very hard to read. Can I ask you to unmute? From Intech, are you there? Pressing them. Can we get you to unmute too?
Yes. Hi.
Good morning. Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's rather obscured on my screen, your name. I do apologize for that. No, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Great, great. And you're obviously also with Intech, and are you involved in the same area as your colleague, Nora Fahana?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you're also working on the American degree transfer programs and those sorts of things?
Yes, exactly. American degree programs and external exams and relatable programs.
Okay, and what particular area or challenges are you finding that you're having to deal with when it comes to international collaboration?
it's quite for the grading system, especially, like we see there's a lot of challenges as well, because we have to adapt to the changes from time to time, so that we will be not left out from, assessing the right way that is asked.
Right. Lots of issues with British A levels, I suspect, at the moment as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, yes, I'm only too aware. Okay, that's interesting. All right. So that's sort of goes into the QA in terms of meeting the standards and changing international standards when they get changed for domestic reasons in the UK, and then suddenly it becomes a problem with you, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right then. Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
No problem.
That's great. Now I can see I've got some other, I'm just looking at, we have some from HiCom. I'm just trying to see if I can find you on my screen. Shanathanthal, Diana, Binti Baharom. Can I get you to unmute?
Hi, good morning, Perry.
Good morning.
Hi. So my name is Diana from the RB HiCom University of Automotive Malaysia. So by profession, actually, I'm the academician here, but recently been appointed as one of the committee for quality assurance for the faculty. So basically, I'm looking at the opportunity for our academician to have like an international collaboration specifically for academician.
Okay, and what sort of collaboration we're talking about? This is staff exchange or for program exchange, global classroom? What sort of things are we talking about?
Yeah, more like exchange of what the technique that we should use in this new era, and also like the reference. And I think because the university scope of international collaboration is been handled by the university quality assurance. For me, I'm focusing more on academic, like more on reference, I think.
When you say reference for, this is for ideas, for collaborations, for how to connect. I'm just trying to tease out just what the main focus is.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, so at the moment, do you have any international collaborations in your faculty area?
On university area is yes, on university level, but for faculty is not yet. Like mainly because me in business and management. So we not, for faculty, we don't yet have the international collaboration that's specifically for faculty. For university, yes, we have. But for university, because we our main focus is in automotive.
Yep.
So the faculty is engineering, is measuring in the automotive one. But for business and management, we are still developing. Yes.
Yeah, and this is often quite a big challenge for institutions. Do you have an institutional-wide focus, or do you drill down to faculties, schools, departments? And some universities is left up to individual academics, and these become quite challenging issues across institutions as to how we develop that and so forth. And so today I'm going to look, for example, at some international collaborations that are done using networks, where universities go into a network and cooperate across, try and cooperate across everything. But obviously the problem is matching up two institutions is very difficult, because although there's something like at least 26,000 universities around the world, it's virtually impossible to find an identical twin. Everybody does something a bit different. And even when it comes to branch campuses, I know that in many cases, sometimes the branch campus doesn't actually offer the same courses as the home campus. So in my area for tourism, for example, tourism is no longer taught at RMIT, for example, in Melbourne, but it is being taught at their RMIT campus in Vietnam. So sometimes, even when it's the same institution, courses end up being different in different locations because student demand is different. So we often find these to be quite challenging. So thank you very much for that, Dana. That you know, it does hit some nails on the head. It's very challenging to find those, to deal with those issues and then to bring that down to a faculty cooperation. And if I might speak to everybody, this is the challenge we find is that when we go into international cooperation, this can be very challenging because obviously it depends on where this works out across different, how this plays out in different institutions, whether and at what level it's done. Is it something that's very top down? In other institutions, it may be very bottom up. Now, obviously, as those international corporations link and come into force, as you can begin to find out from our colleagues, particularly from the branch campuses, when you're in different jurisdictions, then you've got different levels of cooperation. And as we become more international, with more students moving around the world, now I know that isn't happening right at this point in time, but this is causing enormous challenges. And I'll touch on that a little bit later because obviously with my hat on, having been the CEO of an international accreditation body, this was a particular challenge that I was faced with myself. And I'll talk about some ways that even international accreditation bodies are learning how to collaborate more. So let me just do quickly, we may not be able to get around to everybody at this opening session, but we'll pick up on some other people later as well. I can see I've got Lucia Tangi. Is it Tangle? Sorry, Lucia Tangle, I can see you here. Could I get you to unmute? Perhaps not. I can see from Sunway Education Group, I've also got my colleague Liana Binti Ahmad Yassid. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Good morning.
Good morning. Right, so I'm Liana. So I actually belong in the Sunway Foundation program. Actually, we are neighbors under Sunway College. I'm under Sunway College.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I did some internal audit between programs. Okay, so I'm actually here to learn more about how we can actually maintain quality, especially in education. Yeah. And how to actually develop international partnership. Okay, we haven't actually done, our program haven't actually done any international partnership yet. So okay. I am actually here to maybe learn the ropes through how to do that. Yeah.
All right. Okay then. Well, thank you, Lana. Thank you very much for that. And because obviously these are quite challenging issues. You know, when you start developing international collaborations and cooperations and the issues that you get faced with. So I think that's something that I pick up across is where everyone's been doing their introduction. So we'll see how we can pick up on that one. Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and quickly move because we've got a lot of names here. From the University of Tunku Abdul Rahman, I can see it Jagjit Kaur and Singh. I can just see a Jagjit on my screen. I'm assuming that's you. Jagjit?
Yes. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Jagjit, and I've been newly appointed to the Faculty Quality Assurance Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And I was encouraged to attend this to learn new things in quality assurance, and I was quite interested to choose this track on international collaboration. Actually, I'm from the medical faculty, and yes, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Nursing. All right. I would like to actually see how we can collaborate into the nursing programs in overseas. We do have collaborations in the Southeast Asia, and we have not been able to match sending students for experience overseas in nursing. I think there is a restriction on the nursing boards which are governing the nursing programs. And I want to learn whether there's any other nursing colleges or universities who are doing any collaboration on per se in this area of nursing and also in medical.
All right. Well, I know the medical, it's great. We've got some colleagues here from Newcastle. I think they'll be well aware, as is Monash as well, about the medical situation, because that's probably the hardest area, to be honest, when it comes to collaboration and moving students. Not impossible. I do know that there are quite a few institutions who have been doing this, but it's probably one of the more regulated areas versus, let's say, our colleagues who've got from music here. Which is, you know, nothing like as tightly regulated way of getting involved in cooperation. So thank you for that. I'm not sure we'll be able to answer those because they're very specific questions, but we'll be able to follow up, or at least you might find, as they say, a problem shared is a problem solved.
Yes,
so we'll work on that with that one. All right, now look, I'm just mindful of time because I haven't been able to get around absolutely everybody. So what I'm going to do is we'll break this up a little bit, but thank you for that because it does give to me a great sense of a little bit about where to go today. So I will try and get around to everybody else shortly, but I'm just, as I said, mindful of the time that we've got and the limited time. So thank you so much for that, because it is given, as I can see, I've got a lot of people who have brought up some very interesting issues. And as I mentioned this morning, although there's only about 20 people in this workshop, this is an incredibly diverse audience, which is making my job quite challenging because we've got very specific questions that were just raised up there by Jagjan in terms of nursing issues and regulatory, which goes back to some of the issues that were brought up earlier on by Farah down at Newcastle University's Medical Centre and some of the challenges there. And then as Jefferson was raising working with the issue of cross-jurisdictional when you're dealing with two, if you like, quality assurance agencies who have got their own views of what quality is and the standards they wish to apply. So this can make life very, very difficult. And this is a very dynamic situation that universities are finding themselves in. And as has been raised by our colleague Pat there in the Philippines, how do we engage students in being able to collaborate when the world is suddenly and literally frozen with COVID? So I'm just going to stand back a little bit and ask some sort of more, and ask you to reflect on some more generic questions first. Because when I moved to Malaysia 10 years ago, nearly 10 years ago, I moved here from being head of an external quality assurance accreditation body. And so I moved from that back into a university, and I joined Taylor's University in early 2012, initially in the Faculty of Hospitality and Tourism, and then took on the role as Pro Vice Chancellor of Global Engagement. Because at the time, under my then boss, Prof. Hassan, one of the challenges was we didn't have a global strategic plan. So one of my first questions for you to reflect on for your own institution is, what is your global strategic plan? Now, sometimes that plan is very implicit. If you're a branch campus, then obviously you brought a curriculum from one part of the world and you're now delivering it in another part of the world. So that you were part, if you will, an outcome of someone's strategic plan, whether you're from Monash, Newcastle, etc. But when you're an institution to look at it and listening to others, you know, what is the overarching plan? What are your goals? So some institutions are very clear what their aims and goals are. So listening to from the Philippines, clearly with the music students, I can hear very clearly you want to internationalize those students. And it doesn't matter where I travel around Asia, there always seems to be Filipino musicians. In fact, whenever I'm in the Philippines, people seem to burst into song. And in fact, I'm sure if we were running this this seminar on the Philippines this morning, we would have started with some singing as well. So culturally, that's very much part of it. I can understand why that's so implicit in those programs. So when we look at global and establishing global directions, some universities, it's very clear, but actually in many universities, it's not. Obviously, as I mentioned, with branch campuses, it can be somewhat implicit in what's going on. So when we look at international collaborations, like I'm hearing from my colleagues there at Sunway College, many institutions want to develop new links. And that begs the questions, who do you decide to link with? What is and what are their standing? How do I decide whose door to go and knock on? Who do I work out how to partner with? And if I do partner in another jurisdiction, what implications has that got for me as well? And many institutions don't necessarily think that through. So as I put on the bottom of that slide, many institutions are not sure where to start, who to partner with, and even how to evaluate those potential collaborations. And as I indicated a little bit earlier, that begs the question, who leads? Is this something that comes from top senior management? Is it something like I was hearing there from HICOM, which is from Dana, this is something that's led at a departmental faculty level because you're a business faculty within an automotive university. So sometimes you will need a different strategy from what the main institutional strategy might be. So this is where it gets complicated because you might have an overarching strategy, but each school and faculty may collaborate quite differently because medicine is so different to music, to business studies, to my area of hospitality and tourism, for example. So we find that's necessary. So when we talked about standards and so forth, there's not one way and one size fits all because this is across this very broad spectrum we're talking about today. So again, let's stand back for a moment, ask some fundamental questions. Why do institutions have international collaborations and partnerships, and what purposes do they serve? And I think that is really important that someone in the organization has sat down and asked themselves that kind of fundamental question, because sometimes I find people say, look, it's a good idea. Well, why is it a good idea? What is it you wish to achieve? Now, in the brochure that was put out for today, there was an underlying rationale for this session. And there were 4 components within that. The first of those was about international partnerships. And the premise that was made there, or the rationale, was that they are overall, they're beneficial overall for staff, students, and the institution. Now, obviously, I'm not going to disagree with that, but it does raise the question for all of us to ask, how do we actually identify the benefits they bring? And are the links and the partnerships you've got fit for the purpose that you want them? So if your goal is to have international partnerships because you've got transfer students, what partnership links do you want to have for them? So the question is going to be matching up the likelihood of your curriculum to a partner US university's curriculum. What will make the best pathway? There will be issues of pricing. You know, some American universities are horrendously expensive. I was chatting with a friend in Arizona the other day. I think they're about 35,000 US a year, plus all the other costs. Now, that's going to be out of the price range of many other students who, so even that becomes an issue. So when we start looking at these sorts of issues, the second bit today was in the brochure that went out was to look at this question of international experiences. So yes, study abroad and staff exchange programs. So hearing from our colleagues in the Philippines there and from others, and staff exchanges can generate research opportunities to create cultural awareness, which then raises the question in my mind, is the focus more on the activity of global mobility or the outcome of global learning? So sometimes we have to ask, what are we actually measuring here? So a lot of universities just got into measuring how many students went overseas. We ticked the box, so this year was better than last year. Well, I've got news for you, because when students do go overseas, we hope that they implicitly learn. But often what happens is that many international students will just hang out with other international students. So how was that experience structured? How have we evaluated whether their worldview has actually changed, if that's what we were hoping to do? Or have they picked up additional skills that they wouldn't have had versus the students who are here? So for example, I've worked for 14 years with an institution in Austria. Their strategy was they wanted to internationalize their students. The problem was they teach the degree in German. But what they did was one semester, they decided to allow everybody to they made one semester to be taught in English, and that's their exchange semester. And about 75% of their students go out. So what happens is the students who can't go overseas, suddenly the rest of the classroom is filled from people from around the world. And to cap that off, what strategically they decided to do was to bring in a different international lecturer every week. So even the students who can't have that exchange experience are internationalized, because what they find is that 75% of their classmates are suddenly from overseas, and 100% of the faculty teaching staff from overseas. So this was other ways that they've approached what they wanted to do, was to get global learning rather than just always measuring whether it was someone who was moving. Now, this then brings on the next challenge, which was the point that was made in the brochure about communication channels. So it's not just communication channels, but obviously what COVID has brought us is an opportunity to do things quite differently. So if we were running this seminar a year ago, well, dare I say, 13 months ago, we would have actually been face-to-face. A year ago, in Malaysia, we'd already just started our lockdown. So sadly, that's been our last 12 months. But what we have now all become is much more able to do things virtually. So what about virtual exchange? So to answer your the challenge that was thrown to me there from the Philippines, how can musicians do that? And I know, for example, I've got colleagues in Australia who have now started composing work and performing work using Zoom, using people who are all in different countries to be able to perform together. So they may not be able to travel anymore, but they have found other creative ways of doing this. And so this raises the question, as we move more things virtually, can we do things virtually? Can it be done better? And last but not least, this question of developing successful international partnerships, which was raised. And how do we forge strong and meaningful connections? Because yes, it does take time and effort. And as I mentioned, there are tens of thousands of universities on the planet. So there's no shortage of universities in the world, but what there is a shortage is being able to find the right ones for this. And so the question always is, as mentioned, institution, who leads this? What's the strategy and plan? And who does the follow-up and monitoring? Is this something that's done centrally, something that's done at a faculty, down at a school, or at a departmental level? And those are some challenges that we're faced with here. So just moving on, this brings up this challenge, which is the focus, obviously, of the seminar here, which is this issue of internal and external quality assurance and the connectivity between the two. Because obviously, a lot of the time we're dealing with internal quality assurance about our institution. But when we go into an international partnership and collaboration, that may bring us into an external quality assurance. So this may be from another country's QA body, or it can, of course, be from what I would call a accreditation body, something like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So the idea for this workshop was to provide insights on these global standards. And I know that was what was put out, but the challenge, obviously, as you might appreciate now, is there are no global standards per se in this. Now, we have global standards for lots of things. Your mobile phone is set to a global standard. And it's because they've got global standards, you can call people in other countries, because we connect those global standards. But the world is not full of global standards, as we know. I moved to Malaysia from Australia. What many people may not realize is that you cannot even take a train around Australia between the East Coast states. Why? Because when they were all separate colonies, and so Victoria decided to build its railways using broad gauge. New South Wales decided to build its railways using what's called standard gauge. Queensland decided to use narrow gauge. So there's 3 different standards about railway lines. So they can't even connect. So even running a simple train from Melbourne up to Brisbane is actually very difficult and hard. So when we talk about these international standards, when it comes to the collaborations I've heard people talk about today, they are so complicated. So sadly, there's no global standards. What I can talk about are some what I would call norms, if you like, for various types of international collaboration. And these are embodied in what I would call best practice, and also by what a number of external accreditation bodies have been looking at. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and give you some examples from that. But of course, the reality of this is it begs a lot of questions. Why, as I mentioned, fundamental, always go back to basics. Why do you want those international collaborations? Is this a business case? Is this because you really want to do this for your students? And which one of those takes priority, or have they got equal priority? Is it because you feel this will improve your rankings? Is that a particular reason? So what are your wider goals and those more specific aims? And I think it's very important that you are clear about those, because otherwise you can end up knocking on all sorts of doors, trying to create all sorts of international partnerships. And believe me, it's not hard. When I was working in Australia, I had a vice chancellor who every time he met anybody from any other university had to sign an MOU. We had, dare I say, cupboards full of MOUs. The problem was we never did anything with them. So at one point we actually sat down and went through those MOUs. In fact, about 80% of them hadn't led to anything. So the question was, we were signing a lot of them. It made it look really good, impressive list. But who was following up? Who was actually ensuring that any students went on mobility, the research was ever done, there was no funding behind it. So lots of people start collaborations. So there's lots of good intentions, if I can put it that way. So this begs the question. You've got to have a strategy, and then there's the techniques about how to go out and find suitable partners. What sort of things can you do? What sort of networks are there out there? And it's quite challenging because, as I said, there's over 26,000 universities. So where do you start? But then that begs the question, how do you narrow that down? Which countries? What's your geographic focus? Are you looking at South America or Africa? Are you looking at Europe or Australia? Once you've answered some fundamental questions like that, that does begin to start limiting things down, and therefore it's by a process often of elimination. Finally then, how do you evaluate the relationship with those partners? As I've mentioned, many universities have historically got cupboards stuffed full of MOUs. The question then is, how do you make those MOUs mean something? How do you evaluate them? In many cases, most of the collaborative MOUs are initially signed for 3 or 5 years and then have a review. Sometimes it's an automatic, other times it's actually done as a review. And I think it's always important to do that because it makes you reflect on whether this is a partner you want, and these partners change. So, for example, Sunway University, as it is now, when it was part of Sunway College back then, got into a link with Lancaster University back in 2007. Now, we were not a university then. We are a university now. We're now ranked in the top 700 in the world. So things have really changed very significantly. And I think here in Malaysia, people, because we're part of it, we don't realize just how much things really have changed and what that means to how people see it. All right. So this begs those questions, as to what type of international partnerships you're using, the challenges that you are facing, and you've been able to give me those sorts of issues today, and the sorts of additional collaborations you're looking at doing. So whether that's transferring students to the US on an AVP program, with finding your links, and of course, what we tend to find is that there are a range of different forms of international cooperation that may come up. So let me just use some quick examples of the sorts of things that I've dealt with from an institutional point of view and where the quality assurance issues come up. So many institutions have what we call short-term mobility, and sometimes they're not for credit. They're done very much as an experiential. So for example, from Sunway University, a lot of our students go to the UK as part of what they call their ICE, Intercultural Experience Program. So they go to the UK for 2 or 3 weeks in the UK summertime. And that was a not-for-credit program. And we bring students out to Malaysia for a program we call Theme. And so those students come this way and they have an experience here in Malaysia. But Lancaster University does not give any credit for that. So that tends to be a fairly easy, and the QA angle doesn't get involved in this, but it's very much based on an experience. The trend at the moment now is to move these short-term mobility programs into full credit. So what we're seeing is a lot more universities realizing that in fact, globalizing their students is an important outcome. And therefore, they are trying to find ways to embed that into the curriculum and to find ways to measure that to make sure that is part of what is happening. And even what what I'm finding interesting and the challenges, for example, with colleagues here from the medical area, medicine has never been more important to become globalized as the world shrinks. And clearly, as we've got with COVID, viruses move around and diseases is now moved because after all, as we know with COVID, this virus does not respect borders. Now, we shut the borders as a way of trying to stop it, but it's very hard to because these things will move across our borders, which we've created. They're not part of the natural phenomenon. So the challenge we're faced with there is how do we now start to move students again as we start to move them around, and obviously in a case like medicine, where we're seeing a lot of students wanting to get international experience and exposure to diseases. So with climate change, you get warmer parts of the world, diseases which were once only in tropical areas will move into other areas. How do those countries get prepared? How do we make sure that those students have that opportunity to understand that? So the challenge is then put us as educators to facilitate that. But often the QA bodies were not set up for that particular reason. So I've often found with my hat on that it's quite a challenge to get those. The second part of that is now what we call virtual exchange, and I'll talk about that in a moment, or traditional mobility, which is now coming into the full credit. Now, virtual exchange was quite unusual a few years ago. I think it's going to explode. It obviously, thanks to COVID. It was happening before COVID, but now many universities are seeing this as a very legitimate way of shifting their thinking from global mobility to global learning. Because obviously a lot of students could never be mobile because it's expensive. And obviously at the moment, it's, dare I say, quite impossible sometimes. So what can we use using technology to go back to that communication issue that we started with? Now, then we come into other areas where we've got institutions that offer joint degrees, which is one degree which may be offered by more than 2 or more institutions. We have dual degrees where we have 2 separate degrees institutions in different countries who are aligned on one curriculum, which means you've got 2 sets of QA bodies looking at that. We've obviously got here, as we can see with the transnational education, which is a degree from one country, which is being offered in another country. And so the question then is that on a franchise, a same sort of model, or is there some way that it is being customized for that, and that's been seen to be okay? And again, different QA bodies have got different rules. So some say it has to be exactly the same that was offered in the home country. Others have realized that's actually not appropriate, and they have allowed various changes because obviously that does not fit. And other countries have imposed, as Malaysia's done, some NPU units to say that there are additional requirements that have to be put on top as well for it to be recognized here. And then we've got others such as validated degrees, where your own degree is recognized by another institution. So that's the Sunway model, which is how we work with Lancaster University. So there are lots of different forms of collaboration that are out there. And some of these may work for your institution, some of these will not. And there are various variations on the theme, which some of you today will be aware of. So I've just tried to give sort of some samples of what's happening in the space to understand why you need and looking for a collaboration strategy. So a lot of institutions historically in developing countries were looking more for T&E branch campuses, because they didn't have the strengths of institutions. As your institutions mature, become stronger, you move, if you like, up the pecking order, and suddenly you can partner and connect with other institutions. So that brings us to the strategy and to the thinking. So where do you want links? Do you want links and partners everywhere? What sort of collaborations do you want? How do you identify who they are? And in terms of their core structures, regulations, etc. Now, I'm very mindful of the time. We've been going for about an hour, and I know that's a very long time to sit. So my suggestion is going to be that we ought to take a bit of a break for 10 minutes. And I would suggest that tea, coffee, water, please do stretch, because I know that is an important thing to do. We're spending so much Zoom time sitting. So I'm going to suggest that we just take a quick 10-minute break, comfort break. And I hope you have got, as it's at 11 o'clock here in Malaysian time, I think everyone's pretty much on the same time zone today, the opportunity to get something, take a break, walk around, breathe. I'll then come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll share some thoughts I've got on how you can develop collaborations. So I'll pick up on this point about where do you want those links and partners, how do you develop them, and then how can you work with the different quality assurance agencies, picking up on the issues that we've got here, where you are cross-jurisdictional and some of the challenges that have been happening. And believe me, that is something that's been really talked about in the QA space as well. All right, I'm going to turn my camera off now. 10 minutes, please do walk around, and I'll see you back here shortly. And then we'll pick up on the rest of you. Thanks very much. See you in a few moments. Hello, and let's see if I can welcome everybody back. I hope you had a nice break. You managed to get yourself a coffee. I'm feeling much better for my coffee here. Thanks very much. And I hope you're somewhere enjoyable. I was just thinking that with our friends here from the Philippines, that was actually the last trip I was to the Philippines. So I wish I could be enjoying the day over there with you. Had a wonderful visit to Palawan, etc. when I was there. So that was a very special trip at the beginning of last year before we got to go to El Nido and those sorts of places. So that was fantastic. So look, it's wonderful to welcome everybody back and to have you be joining us. And I hope that over the next, until we finish this in the next 50 minutes, I'm going to try and break this into 3 sections because I can see I've got 3 quite different audiences. So what I've tried to do is to break down what I had prepared to try and deal with some of those very interesting issues that came up this morning. And again, I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody. Please do, if you've got any you've got any questions, do let me know in the chat here because it'd be great to deal with them. And as I said, after this session, I'll be more than happy to follow up with you because I can see there are very different issues facing branch campuses, to the student mobility issues, to finding those international partnership issues. So, you know, a lot of really different issues that we're facing there. So, look, let me pick up just briefly where I left off. Because what I'm going to try and do in the next 50 minutes or 45 minutes rather, is to pick up on 3 issues. One is, how do you deal with this issue of the first one, which is this issue of branch campuses and mutual recognition? Secondly, how do you decide how to collaborate rather than compete? And this is quite a big institutional question. So I know a lot of you're involved in the QA bit, but it really begs going back to some fundamental questions about why do this, and then to pick up on the new opportunities of the virtual exchange, etc. So where I left off, oops, there we go. Oh no, that was it. Where I left off was this question about how do we decide to do the global collaboration? Do you find partners and how do you go about that? And how do we deal with partnerships in other jurisdictions? Now, lots of institutions want to have other partners, and it begs lots of questions about where do you decide to pick them. Now, I remember when I was what institution I was working at in Australia, we tried to get many different institutions engaged with colleagues. And I hardly got any emails back. But suddenly I got an email one day from the University of Hawaii. So I circulated that. I was literally knocked over in the rush. And it became very clear to me that sometimes where we pick our international partners actually can often have more to do with the interests of certain individual academics than it might do with our actual strategies and institution. So again, I say come back to the first premise of all this. Why do we want to have the partners look at this geographically? Look at this from a really solid point of view rather than just the serendipitous point of view. So then when we look at that, finding this right fit. Now, this is the challenge of the mouse talking to the elephant. You can still play the same game, but you are very different. And as I mentioned, the universities come in many different shapes and sizes. So if you're a small institution, do you really want to partner with a very big institution? How well aligned are your courses? Are you of similar ranks or not? Now, if you're looking to work with and pass students on a pathway, then you may be looking for a much better institution for them to work with. That's what the parents and the students are looking for. That fits in your strategy. When you're looking for student exchange, that may not be the best way of going, because you want an institution that is perhaps fairly similar. Now, not always it's going to be identical, because after all, the students want a different experience. When people often ask me, why do I pick the exchange partners I pick? I often reply and tell them, actually, I'm not looking for big universities, because I send a student overseas for one semester. They're gone for 12, 14 weeks. When I was an exchange student, I went from a relatively small university to a large one in the US. University of Massachusetts in Amherst has about 30,000 students. My halls of residence was bigger than my hometown in England. It was daunting. We had 11 high-rise buildings, 23 stories. The library was 25 stories, the world's tallest library tower, as it happened. It was quite overwhelming for me. And the problem was, even when I met somebody, I never saw them again. So I've learned that for my preference when I send students on exchange is to actually find smaller institutions where I know they'll be taken care of, they can make friends, they can get to see people again and again, and they can feel part of a community quickly. Now, that's nothing against big universities. And sometimes big universities are broken down into smaller parts. So again, it works. But we have to think about what is the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. So I know some universities I get the response, oh, they're not very well ranked. Why would we partner with them? And I'm saying, I'm not partnering them because I want their rankings. That's not the issue. The issue is the student experience I'm giving them. And if they're only going there, now obviously I want to make sure the course content is relevant. Obviously I want to make sure it's the right academic level, but we have to think of this on a holistic, and consequently there's trade-offs. So we need to think about the outlook, the mindset, and dare I say, the aspirations. So you can imagine that when many UK and Australian universities were looking into Asia back in the 90s and early 2000s, how they were evaluating institutions in this country. So as I mentioned earlier, we've seen enormous change here in Malaysia during that time. And I'm constantly amazed when many people come back to visit me here, they go, wow, things have changed here so much. I'll be honest, I go back to some British campuses and they're just the same as they were 30 years ago. So these things, the speed, sometimes we forget the speed that these things have happened. We also have to look at our underlying strength or weakness. So sometimes when you look at a university, don't always just look at the bit you can see. It's to understand what lies the strength behind it. The academics you may not see, their info structure. They may not have fantastic buildings, but they may have wonderful online internet capacity that you don't have, and ability to deliver on that. So it does require more than a cursory look. And this means that when you're picking partners, someone at your institution has to do the investigation. Now, sometimes that is done, as I said, at a central level, departmental, school. It varies by institution. But unfortunately, often it's just because someone met somebody once upon a time and that was how it happened. And they could be good links too. I'm not saying that's fundamentally problematic, but there has to be some further justification and then a period of review that's based on whether that is a long-term sustainable partner. So what criteria? So if you don't have some criteria, because believe me, not every institution is going to meet your criteria. There will be, as I mentioned earlier, trade-offs. So when you develop your own standards, because sadly there are very few global standards, as I've mentioned, you need to develop your own standards for how you're going to look for partners and the standards that you want them to meet, that you feel are appropriate to you. Remember, over time that will change. Just as you're evolving as an institution, so too are other institutions evolving as well. Now, when we look at this more closely, then you've obviously got to delve down into some of the detail. And so one of those criteria often when you pick up other partners is what's their quality assurance like? Now, often, well, you can't tell that because you're not internal to that organization. So therefore, we have to use external reference points. And often that is whether they also are an accredited business school. So for example, many business schools have what's called AA CSB accreditation. And within that network, those business schools respect one another because they've also achieved the same external accreditation. So the challenge is when you go to many countries is that you discover that none of those institutions have got any external QA. It's all that national QA. And unfortunately, that may or may not give you much indication. And this can be very challenging because sometimes those QA bodies don't produce material in the language you can even read. So this became a particular issue, which I'll come into in my previous job with the ICE, because we were dealing with several hotel schools in the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands is a very international, very small, but very international country. Most of the Dutch are pretty good and fluent in English too, and German, and another language. However, their national accreditation body produced everything in Dutch. So the problem was it was very inaccessible to other institutions to understand what the accreditation was based on. And I'll explore to you in a moment how that was changed. When it comes to rankings, are you going to select a certain ranking? So when I started at Taylor's, our view there was that we were only going to look at partners. This is for the AVP transfer programs and for international collaborations that were QS top 400. So that was the cutoff we decided to make. Now, of course, there were exceptions because some programs happen to occur in very distinctive institutions that may be standalone. Music could be perhaps one of them, but obviously there are other areas where you tend to find institutions do not particularly have particular types of programs, and therefore the rankings is not much use to you. When I was working with an institution in the UK, we were talking about how we would evaluate exchange partners. And the discussion came around to about would we use QS, which we felt was not appropriate because not in particularly in Europe, not all the institutions, particularly smaller ones, will go into QS because it is not appropriate for them. So for example, in Germany, you have big research universities. You also have University of Applied Sciences. Now they can not offer PhDs. They can only offer bachelors and masters. Most of them have 3,000 to 5,000 students. Some are bigger. Same in Austria and the Netherlands. They are often excellent partners to have as exchange partners, but they do not appear naturally in the QS rankings. Some do, but not all of them. So then we looked at other rankings you can look at, which are things such as Webometrics. And the discussion there was, where would we look? So we looked at the top, did they appear in the top 25% of institutions in that country or 40%? So again, there's no global standard per se, but you have to make a judgment call. And again, it's understanding how those things are made and come around. Now, if we go back here in Asia to 2016, why does all this become important? So if I'm to take you back about 5 years, we had the AUN International Conference was held at UKM here in Malaysia. And the focus of that was on an institutional assessment instrument. But when you actually looked at the presentations, a lot of the focus was about how we had student mobility. And a big part of this particular conference at the time was how we could work with the European Union under what's called EU Share. And EU Share, for some of you who may be aware, the European Union gave money to ASEAN to promote mobility of students around ASEAN and also between ASEAN and Europe. Now, in this case, what Europe was seeing was that many European ASEAN students could not afford to go to Europe, and Europe wasn't particularly appealing to come to certain countries here. So they were willing to put money there to open up and to facilitate that. The key issue there is you can see mobility of persons. Now, the challenge was, as you can see on the next slide, is this whole issue of how we get students, when they come mobile, how we move the credits. So this brought into the European framework the issue of the European Credit Transfer System, ECTS. Now, as you can see here, when they compared the EU to ASEAN, there's one question mark. And that one question mark sits under the ASEAN Credit Transfer System. And so this is a particular challenge we're faced with, because in Europe, they've moved all the universities under the Bologna Agreement, which so it's not just the 27 countries in the EU, by the way, that's now I think over 50 countries actually subscribe to ECTS, to give them a common platform so that for credits to move. And then built on that is also the QA to understand what that counts for in a particular course. So that really helps when it comes to the collaboration. Now, as mentioned earlier, my experience was in external quality assurance. Now, the body I worked for was originally established by the Australian federal government. I was seconded from my university to work for the ICE, which was one of 5 different bodies. Now, the ICE stood for the International Centre for Excellence in Tourism and Hospitality Education. We had 5 years of funding, and then the funding ended. During that time, we developed 4 pillars of excellence based upon recognition, development, promotion, equality, and our benchmarking. And the idea was the goal was to build also a network. This is what we did. But then, of course, the network got larger. And interestingly, today, most of the members are no longer in Australia. They're members in 15 countries. And as I came back to making the point about the Netherlands, so what we've ended up doing here is to actually partner with national quality assurance agencies. Now, in this case, we knocked on their door and they kind of knocked on our door at the same time. So for example, in the Netherlands, let me just give you this, we ended up having 11, through NDAO, they have 11 standards, which are very internally focused, curriculum, content learning, etc., facility staff. We had 14 standards of excellence. The trouble the Dutch faced was that no one outside the Netherlands recognized their QA. We were international because that's how we had focused ourselves on realizing hospitality and tourism education. So the question was for the Dutch schools, could they get both international and domestic, given how close these were? So what we decided to do was to come up with a mutual recognition. So we ended up working with the NDAO to give dual recognition. So we ended up with accreditation teams that were both domestic and international. So we would have 2 from the NDAO and 2 from the ICE. And then the team would go in. So we signed an MOU with them. Now, this was the beginning of an interesting situation because some of you today are joining us from the Philippines. And that then took us into developing a discussion with CHED in the Philippines. And then that opened up a discussion with an organization called Papacoa. So the issue in the Philippines was that CHED was saying, if you'd achieved international recognition, then you didn't need domestic. So the question was you had to be recognized for that international accreditation. And we've done a similar thing in Taiwan, and we're also now exploring that with other countries. So I know for those of you in the medical area, this is a particular challenge because medical boards are notorious on being very, if I don't want to use the word parochial, but nationalistic in terms of they want to be in control of what's happening in their hospitals, doctors, standards. That's understandable. That's life and death situation in those situations. Obviously, when it comes to musicians, it's not quite the same level of gravitas when it comes to accreditation. These are the sorts of challenges. So what we did there was that we had a dual accreditation for all the Dutch hotel schools, 5 of them, 5 public, 2 private, so 7 of them in total. So that's how we took through a clustering approach of that. Now, the Netherlands are a relatively small country, so this was an interesting case study for me to share with you. Because as we move through from that, you've then got to raise yourself the questions, how can you develop and work with your own bodies? So we've also done that, I should point out, with the ICE, because we're from Australia, we reached out to TEXA. And through them started talking to TEXA about how, when we did our accreditation, this could be done together so that they would not, so that institutions would not just receive a domestic TEXA accreditation, but also an international accreditation. So we're beginning to see international accreditation bodies move in some of those directions. Now, I know today that's not going to solve the issues for colleagues here in Monash and at Newcastle, but I think sometimes the universities can play an important role in actually getting these quality assurance bodies to actually talk to one another. Because clearly many countries want mobility of students. So the question now is, how do you facilitate that? And I had that same situation here where it came to with the Malaysian Architects Association here. And we had this particular problem that they would not allow credits to come into the program. They said they would refuse to recognize them. So then I went and did some digging to find out how many of those architects had actually accredited in other jurisdictions. Now, the LAN, so I think it's called LAN, which is the Malaysian accreditation body, is now accrediting UK institutions. So for example, Manchester Metropolitan University has an unusual situation because it co-owns a School of Architecture with the University of Manchester, and that has got Malaysian architects accreditation. So there's now been this discussion about how RIBA, the UK one, and the Malaysian one can actually cooperate, talk about standards, and relieve some of the issues that are now happening, particularly obviously because of COVID. And even for us as an accreditation body, we're doing a lot of this stuff virtually now as well. So that's, again, changing things substantially. So come back to your question, what should your strategy be? So for many institutions, this is quite important because often institutions are more interested in being competitive than collaborative. And for those of us in Malaysia, and I know the Philippines has got a lot of universities too, competition has been where our focus has been. We want to stand out in our field, and therefore the focus has been more about us than who we work with, unless there's been some sort of part of our strategy. So universities can be fiercely competitive. But remember, there is a time and a place for each strategy. There is an old African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So again, what's the short term and what's the long term view on this? So when you're looking for collaborative partners, these are not short term relationships. These can be very long term relationships, which can last not just years, but decades. So also, to pick up on another saying, competition makes us faster, but collaboration makes us better, because it allows you to tap into knowledge, academic knowledge, that your own institution may not have. Let's remember, most academics can be quite parochial to one institution. So why is it so important? Well, as the saying here went, you can't whistle a symphony. It requires a whole orchestra. Now, many institutions are not large enough to have the full set of the orchestra. So how do we find other musicians, in the case of our friends from the Philippines with music, to play with? Because that's what becomes important. Now, sometimes universities get a very competitive mindset, and it's what I call the competitive Spartan. For those of you who know the story about the Spartan soldiers, the 300, so it doesn't matter where you go in the world, everyone wants to be number one. And this shows itself as being competitive. So if you're in California, UCLA will say they're the number one public university, while Berkeley will also claim to be the number one public university. If you're in Malaysia, then you can be the number one private university, or you can be Thailand and be number one private university. Everybody wants to be number one. So it doesn't matter if you've got a master's degree, or if it's an institution, everyone wants to be that. So underneath, lots of universities are fiercely competitive, which is driven by a desire for recruitment, typically, not always, but typically. The challenge is through all this is that that's one bit of who you are. And there are just about rankings now for everything that can prove where you sit or don't sit. But again, we always have to question. Now, when we look at that, even when it comes to internationalization, You can see from this one that world's 20 topmost international universities. Now, what this ranking is based on is just the sheer number of international students they've got. Well, to be honest, it's not very hard when you're in Macau, because the entire population of Macau is 500,000 people. You're sitting next to a country with 1.1 billion people. So despite the fact they like to claim that they're a special administrative region, part of China, they'll count the students as international. So guess what? Hong Kong and Macau have very high numbers of international students, just as the point I was making about the Czech Republic. So often it's how we count. So often internationalization is not just about the sheer number of international students, it's about your mindset. And it comes back to my earlier point about how you want to do that. So these rankings can be very competitive. And when we understand the rankings, part of that is there are typically in the rankings, there are a series of criteria. In the case of the Times, there's basically 5 areas. One of them is international outlook. So this becomes very important for an institution. If you look at QS, you need other institutions to vote for you. In fact, the weighting is that other institutions in other countries have got much more weighting. So if it's much better if I vote for the University of the Philippines than if I vote for the University of Malaya. The weighting is counted differently. So having international friends becomes very important. So these sorts of issues play into how the rankings are done. Now, when we look at this, we see across the typical areas of an institution, and I'm just taking 5 as an example. Student recruitment at one end of the spectrum can be highly competitive because we want to get the best students. After those students, we need to meet our targets, etc. We can see student experience being very competitive too, because that ties into student recruitment. When it comes to teaching, many academics start to cooperate, and we're increasingly seeing that thanks to COVID. With research, often the grants are given not just on a national but an international basis. So now we have to collaborate. And when it comes to student exchange, it is highly collaborative. You cannot exchange with other countries unless you've got collaborative partners. It just won't work. So when we look at this spectrum of competition to collaboration, it can require horses for courses. And again, even when it comes to student recruitment, your recruitment, if you're, for example, with the Intech College, for example, your recruitment may be based on the fact that you've got a good pathway through to other institutions in the US, in the case of your American degree transfer program. So even there, what we see is that collaboration can be a very important part of that tool. So as you can see, this is an ad from the UK, you know, top 10 for best student experience. These are competitive things that we're going for. But let me bring you to the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. And he recently said, as you can see here, global universities must be places where we're allowed to let our thoughts roam across the cosmos, to collaborate with others, and to share our findings and ideas. So as you can see here, he sees this as being absolutely integral to how his university is going to develop, to be part not just of one country, to be global. So this becomes where it becomes very important in that. So we've talked about different ways of internationalization, but finding partners with that can be very important. So if I just turn to our colleagues in the Philippines, for example, there, what you've seen is partnerships developed using transnational education to again upskill, to develop, and as you can see, a number of universities, including the University of the Philippines, has been part of this CHEDBAC project with the British Council. Again, it had to have collaboration. They had to have partners to work on developing these links. So in this case, you were able to find universities from the UK with very specialized skills in particular areas the Filipino universities felt that they were short of and the government had as a priority area. And I believe that's actually now seen those universities actually form a bit of a consortium together. So When I worked in the Netherlands, for example, we wanted our students to have a grand tour. So in fact, at NHL standard, you can study in a different country every semester. The curriculum is the same. So behind the scenes, because they could control that, they've been able to offer a different type of global experience. So they have institutions in Bali, in Bangkok, in Qatar, South Africa, and the Netherlands. So students can actually move each semester. But they've been able to coordinate this, and again, through working with the quality assurance agencies, not only in each country. So as you can imagine, this is challenging. But they took that as their institutional vision to be something they wanted to be able to offer their students to become a truly global institution. So as I said, it goes back to what you want to achieve to be able to do that. When I was at Taylor's, our goal there was to grow our number of international partners. When I arrived at Taylor's in 2012-13 time, we had about 17 partners, as I recall. When I left in 2018, we had over 200 exchange partners. So we were signing an MOU about every second week on average. So this was an enormous pace of growth. But what we had done is looked at the number of students we wanted to send overseas, and we developed a target of 20%, 10% was our short term, then 20%. Most exchange partner institutions will only exchange 2 to 3 students a semester. So we then worked out the numbers we needed to meet the number of students we had. And obviously some degrees were more likely to have students who could go on exchange. We then had to develop and redevelop our curriculum, or a process we called unlocking the curriculum, to give flexibility to our students to go. Because there is no point in having lots of international exchange partners, but having a very fixed and inflexible curriculum, which means they can't go. Or if they do go, they cannot transfer the credits back. So you have to work holistically within the institution to allow that to happen. Then within that, we also brings me to where I'm based at Sunway. Now, in the case of there, I've obviously got to know over the last couple of years our colleagues at Lancaster University very well. And it's been interesting looking at their strategy to internationalize themselves. Now, Lancaster University is actually based in a small, well, most people call it town. Technically, it's a city in the UK because they've got a little cathedral and a castle, but it's a town. Located about an hour or so north of Manchester. They have got campuses and they've got branch campuses, they've got partnerships, they've got validation agreements. So they have said we want to internationalize, but they've recognized that each area they go into, they will need a slightly different approach to what they're doing. So again, it's very rare to find a one-size-fits-all when you're looking to go internationally because of QA regulations, ownership regulations, etc. So all these issues have to be navigated as you move internationally. And then we can look at very deep relationships. Now, obviously, we've got some colleagues here from Monash today, and Monash kind of rocked things probably about 20 years ago when they announced a very deep relationship with Warwick University in the UK. And they agreed to pool resources to even have cross-appointed staff between the two institutions. So they were looking to get a depth of a relationship. Theirs was not so much about breadth, but more finding several key partners that they could develop. Now, Monash obviously had a branch campus strategy, which is how they opened up here in Malaysia. And more recently, they've opened up in Indonesia, where they've opened up a postgraduate campus. So their strategy was quite different to many other institutions who have looked to have a lot of different partners that do quite narrow individual things, or do you look to find a more similar partner that you can do a number of deep things. So again, this goes back to what is your strategy and what are you looking to do that? So this then begs the question, how do you wish to position yourself globally? Are you, for example, like Intech going to say our position in the marketplace is we help people to get to where they want to go or to open doors? Is that you're a facilitating role rather than necessarily being the destination. Other institutions, as you can see here, we've got, for example, have taken their titles such as be proud to be truly global, Asia's Global University from the University of Hong Kong, from Tokyo University, top global university in Japan, or from Venus University in Indonesia. So how do you wish to see yourself being positioned? And what does it mean to be a global university? So this then builds into it how you develop your courses, excuse me, as they relate to that. So for example, if you develop a Bachelor of International Business, what does that mean? So within your own institution, you might, for example, say, well, we're going to offer that, and these are our internal standards for a bachelor's degree. Now, when I was working with the ICE, I ended up with enormous fights with institutions because they kept calling their degree international, and yet they refused to be able to define what they meant by the word international. In fact, one university, when I asked them, and I said, what do you mean you've got a degree in international hotel management? What's international about it? And they said to me, well, Perry, we get a lot of foreign students. Now, that for me is not an indication necessarily of being international. It's one, but it is by no means a definitive. So we have to look in terms of international curriculum structure, content, resourcing. Do you have international experienced staff? The exposure you're going to give your students? Do they have to do international projects? Do they do an international internship? Can they go on exchange, mobility? Have you got internationalization at home activities? So Lancaster University in the UK, for example, has just added an extra year to its traditional 3-year degree to have an international version that gives those additional things within that context for those students who want that. Now, from an external point of view, you then have to ask yourself, well, who are our partners? How do we select them? Where are they? Are they properly accredited? Where are they ranked? What quality assurance have they got? Who monitors it? How do they contribute to the overall international experience that your students are getting? So this then becomes part of the reality of how we're going to look at this from an internal and from an external point of view. So again, there are going to be different bodies and agencies that get involved in those sorts of discussions. Now, often, as I mentioned, many universities see themselves as the long distance runner. Others, dare I say, just see themselves in the race. Others have said, no, we're all in the boat together. Now, sometimes international collaboration comes from domestic collaboration. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in the Philippines, it was quite interesting to me to see that on the back of this connections from the British Council, a bit of a grouping of domestic institutions had formed. If we look around the world, we begin to see this is now happening. So historically, lots of people in the US refer to the Ivy League. And most people are quite shocked to know that the Ivy League is actually only 8 institutions. And it actually originally had nothing to do with academics. It was actually about playing American football. But that be as it may, all these things have got different historical starting points. So in Australia, you also have the group of 8. China's got a group of 9. The UK's got its Russell group, which is about 30 odd universities. You've then got looser groupings like the Regional Universities Network in Australia, for example. So again, some universities are already used to being part of a grouping domestically. And then the question is once you have got used to working domestically with people within your network, how do you now take that out? So most institutions, dare I say, are quite comfortable in their own skin, in their own 4 walls, who they talk to. Then you've got to spread that out. And then how do you go internationally to do that? So I believe the future will be a lot more international connections, and that this diversity will spread us out. And a lot of that will come from being able to use the internet connectivity that we've got. So lots of people say to me, what's the best strategy when you're going global? Now, there's no simple answers in life. I really do wish there were. And but one of my questions for you to leave you with today is, can you identify your institutional's international collaboration strategy? Can you identify, is that actually developed and written down? If not, that's probably a very good starting point for you as an institution to start from. If you wish to go online and do a little bit of research, and I was doing this project a couple of years ago, what I did was I looked at all the different institutions that I could find who published their international strategy. Now, I'm not going to go through it all today because we're running rapidly out of time. So just to finish off, what I'll do is just to show you some of the points. So let's take the University of Edinburgh, for example. You can see here their second issue is blue chip partnering. So in other words, what they want to do is to develop strategic links with selected leading universities and organizations. And they've said very clearly a best with best focus. So they made it very clear to themselves who they're looking to work with, okay? So you can see then the next one is global academies, interdisciplinary research with international partners. So you can begin to see from them quite clearly which way they're going. If we look in Australia at UTS, which is based in Sydney, you can see their second key point is key institutional international partnerships. Recruiting international students is at number 9. So we can begin to see that the focus of different institutions. And here, if we take a university which has even got the word international in its name, FIU is based in Miami in the United States, they're looking to develop programs with a global focus. They want students who have got global strength and global citizenship. 3 is, of course, more international students, but here they've even spelt out where they wish to recruit their faculty from. They wish to develop collaborative research. So several years ago, I had a group of institutions come over from the Philippines to meet with me because they were looking at how to go about hiring international staff in the Philippines. There's relatively few expats in the Philippines compared to Malaysia, for example, and most certainly compared to Singapore. Some of the institutions in Singapore, 75, 80% of the staff are international. They have globalized their staff. So here we can begin to see how is built into that. And if we looked across this, and this was done back in 2015, I developed 10 emergent themes for universities. But as you can see from the work I was doing, institutional partnerships were the priority. And research, remember we're universities, was now a necessity. It wasn't an option because universities were realizing they couldn't do it on their own. So again and again, it comes out that international cooperation is important and the projects that we've got developed because most institutions are able to do this on their own. Now, I know today the time flies by as always when we do these workshops. And so I've really not been able to even touch onto the virtual learning, which I'm very sorry about because that I think opens up a whole range of different ways that we can do new collaborations and different ways of collaborating. So I've just been conscious of the time for the day. I would just like to open up the chat because as I said, I'm sorry I've not been able to cover absolutely everything I'd like to have done today. I will be very happy to follow up with any or all of you about how different institutions can go forward with their collaborations. But really, today, as you could hear from our opening part, we're 3 very different types of audiences, even within this small group. One which has been about how can we develop QA, where the jurisdictions cross between, say, Malaysia and Australia. Second grouping is very much between how we can find international collaborations and partners to help students go on exchange. And I've tried to touch on some of the issues that we're faced with that. And Sandy just ran out of time to talk about how we might be able to look at new ways of developing exchange partnerships based on virtual exchange and the other opportunities that might be there. And the third audience I can see is very much interested in how we develop international partnerships in terms of facilitating movement of students to other countries for them to achieve their educational goals. And of course, on the back of all that, because we've got the branch campuses here, this is implicit in terms of how TNE has developed in Malaysia. and how Malaysian institutions are now hybrids. So many institutions here work with an international partner, but Malaysia itself has now reached that point of development where it's now offering its courses through various universities in other countries. So I think to leave you today, I would suggest that the internationalization, to go back to where we started, there are no simple standards or norms. In each of the areas today, and some of you've identified, for example, medicine is very specific, and there are particular challenges in that area relating to medical boards, councils, where you can do housemanships, etc. And those, I think, are issues where it really does help if you can get, as I showed with what we did in hospitality and tourism, to actually get the bodies to come together to talk. Because when they actually did that, they began to realize they actually had some vested interests that were actually, we would be able to provide solutions rather than just create them with more problems. But I know that's easy to say and difficult to do. With our friends looking at music and education in the Philippines, again, the student mobility has, of course, slowed down dramatically. But I think what has happened is there's been significant pickup in institutions who are willing now to talk about collaboration. To be honest, I know many institutions would have been concerned about sending their students to Manila in the past with safety and security concerns. That situation has changed, but of course, many institutions would say, well, international online, not a problem. And it's also, I think, reducing the fear factor for many students about going to destinations which they may never have heard of. So I think we can find innovative and new ways to start those collaborations and partnerships, which were not there in the past. Virtually every university has now been able to figure out how to teach online. We could not have said that 12 months ago. Today, we can. And even with our links, for some way with Lancaster, we're now seeing, you know, new ways of staff connecting, which was not done before, because lectures have been recorded, they've been uploaded. And so what we're seeing now is universities move from being analog institutions within a walled garden, where I got students and they were in my university. We're now seeing this significant change to a new platform, I believe, where we can see much more collaboration. Are there simple ways to do that? Well, to leave you with the final message today is sadly, there's not. There are standards within various organizations, but there is nothing that can be brought out as an easy silver bullet. So I hope today's been interesting. I'm more than happy to follow up with everyone and anyone. Please do drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to respond or to do a private Zoom catch up with you in your different institution. And if you're close by in KL, then please do drop by for a coffee as soon as we're allowed to. Prof. Abby, good to see you back.
Thank you so much, Prof. Perry, for a really engaging and really personalized interactive session with the participants. I'm sure the participants really appreciated your ability to connect at an individual level, yet also, really give us an overview of our collective responsibility and opportunities that come with international referencing. You are right. I mean, the group was heterogeneous, but the whole discourse on international benchmarking, international references and collaborations also means it's really heterogeneous. And you're right also about the fact that there isn't a silver bullet. And that is because ultimately it's how we contextualize and how we satisfy, both parties' needs. And I thought that you very clearly, gave us some insights into how you have done it personally, and also some opportunities and tips that maybe we can apply. I also want to thank you for making that extra, sort of helping hand to suggest that you're willing to interact with the participants post this workshop. So I hope that all of you will take advantage and then exploit this goodwill gesture, because we obviously need to get more of us, speaking the same language. But also there has been some questions whether we could see, whether they can have access to your slides, Perry. I don't want to put you in the spot here, but I'm sure that at some point, maybe once you remove some bits and pieces, we would certainly love to get some access to maybe some of your salient recommendations in terms of today's theme.
Sure, not a problem. Always very happy to share. As I said, in this day and age, once you've got online on a camera, then whether you like it or not, it's all been captured somewhere.
Yeah, true. And I think, I certainly also agree with Liana's comment that, it's such a shame that, we don't have enough time. But, this workshop was a teaser to, of course, greater engagements in the future. All right, I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I just have a few announcements to make. But before that, can I have everyone to switch on the camera, and essentially let's take a group photograph and celebrate, this opportunity of fellowship.
Great idea. Be lovely to see everybody. And apologies to everyone I didn't get to earlier, but I could see we're going to run out of time badly today.
Yeah, I was actually quite nervous initially, so I was glad.
I know. I could feel your nervousness.
All right, so let's get on to gallery view. We have our fabulous Samuel here to take our beautiful picture, and also I see we have got our organizing chair, Dr. Chang, in here too. So thank you so much for joining us. All right, so quite a number of you haven't switched on your cameras yet, but that's okay if we will then maybe Photoshop your photographs.
Oh, you can make us better looking. Fantastic, that's what we need.
Okay, so I'm just going to give everyone another 5 to 10 seconds. We've got NAB, Chong Kok Han, Nur Shuhanida, Kia Singh, Ken Yek, Farisha, if y'all can switch on. And of course, we have more than 24 of you in the room. So Samuel will obviously take two. Oh, one's enough? Oh, Samuel tells me one's enough. So forget what I said. So I'm going to pass it to Samuel. Why don't you tell us when to smile and when to say SieQA or whatever it is that we say today?
All right. So yeah, on the count of 3, I'm going to take a screenshot. So everyone say SieQA on 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. SieQA.
SieQA.
Okay, that's great. I'm just going to take one more again.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, ready? 1. Sorry, hold on. Give me one moment. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. SieQA.
SieQA.
All right, got it. That's great. Thank you,
great.
everybody.
Thank you so much, Samuel. But don't leave yet. We also have a feedback form that I would like. No, we're going to do. Oh yeah, sorry. We're going to. Yeah, I'm sorry. We actually have a feedback form, but we'll only fill that up in the afternoon. I'm informed. But I just thought I'll also inform you what we have in the afternoon. So there is going to be this speaker, Dr. Hazman Shah, who obviously some of you might know has been involved in a lot of the Malaysian quality assurance framework. So I hope that we can build on the sharing by Perry and now think about now that we have got these opportunities to collaborate at the international level, how can we build that into a more global framework of quality assurance? So I look forward to all of you having lunch. The great thing about this conference is, the menu is totally up to you. It's unlimited. And I look forward to seeing you at 2 o'clock. Bye. Thank you once again.
Thanks again very much.
Everyone.
And please don't hesitate to contact me. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Take care. Bye. See you back.